Sadiq Khan set to attack what he will describe as the government's denial of the immense damage he says Brexit is doing. He wants us to rejoin. What is it that the London mayor doesn't like about a democratic decision of the people of Great Britain?
Well, the thing is, he's actually not really even challenging that much the leaving the EU so much as not being aligned with the EU single market. And that's the thing. And as for the denial of the damage, that's the thing.
No, I didn't say that. Denial of a democratic decision.
Okay, yeah, so as far as the democratic part of it goes, we left the EU, we're out of the EU. What he's talking about is alignment with the EU single market, which, by the way, was not the decision of the British people. We did not vote to leave the single market. That wasn't on the ballot paper. In fact, if you would actually
isn't that part and parcel of being in the EU?
No, because Norway isn't in the EU, but it is in the single market.
If we didn't vote for that, why didn't we stay in the single market then?
Because the Tories made that decision against our will. In fact, if you actually look at it, because we weren't asked about the single market in 2016. The only two elections we've had since, in both of those elections, parties that were firmly committed to staying in the single market got a majority of the votes. The British people have never asked to leave the single market. And as for the damage, that debate is pretty much over because we can all see it. In fact, the Tories aren't even denying it anymore. Rishi Sunak, our Prime Minister, he says that Brexit has damaged our trade with the EU. And he says the answer to our economic troubles right now, the poverty across the country, is economic growth. And his chancellor, the guy he put in charge of the economy, says that rejoining the EU single market would improve our growth. He's simply choosing not to. So with millions of people across the country really struggling, he's choosing to keep us in pain. And their experts, the Office of Budget Responsibility, the economists that they use to make their economic decisions, they're saying that Brexit has cost 4% of our GDP. That's an equivalent of £100 billion a year. Which equates to about $40 billion in taxes. So when you look across the country, things that need to be fixed, like the strikes, that's the worst estimates say that might cost maybe.
So rejoining would solve the strikes. I mean, well, I don't think the strikes have got anything to do with Brexit. What on earth have the strikes got to do with Brexit?
I'll answer the question. The most extreme estimates of the strikes say that it might cost $28 billion in order to pay them in line with inflation. That's the most extreme estimate. Well, according to the government's experts, the economists that they use to make their decisions, rejoining the EU single market would deliver an extra $40 billion in tax revenue. So they would easily be able to afford to pay them in line with inflation. So people's wages wouldn't suffer. This would solve the problems.
Well, let me ask you this, Femi. Hypothetically, if we wanted to rejoin the single market, what would Brussels demand of us? They wouldn't just let us rejoin, would they? They'd probably make us open our borders again. They'd make us come into line with all sorts of EU diktats and indeed the EU outlook. We couldn't just join the free market without ramifications, could we?
The single market is
but answer the question. So what would Brussels demand?
I am answering the question. Okay. It's 4 freedoms, which includes freedom of movement of people, free movement of capital, free movement of services.
We don't want that though. We don't want free movement of people.
Says who? Our economy is.
Yeah, I'll tell you who says it. That's the British people. That's what they voted for. Primarily, they wanted sovereignty over their own borders. It's not going very well, I admit, but that's what they wanted. They do not want free movement.
Immigration.
No, Femi, address the point. Femi, please address the point. The British people do. Oh, come on! Don't just talk. Don't just talk. Please listen to me.
Kevin,
listen to me. Oh, come on.
I just answered your question.
Look, look, please address the point. Address the point. The British people do not want freedom of movement. Hence, we're not going to join the free market again.
And I answered your question. Immigration was not on the ballot paper in 2016. And in both of the elections that followed, the majority voted for parties that were committed to staying in the EU single market, which includes immigration. And right now, our economy is crying out for workers. We have worker shortages across the country. The NHS is on its knees because we've lost doctors and nurses. Because in 2016, EU citizens made up 5% of the population, but 10% of our doctors. So immigration was one of the things.
And of course, the great thing about that is, you know, there's nearly 70 million people living here already. Our infrastructure is creaking at the seams, and of course, letting many more people in would be terrific for that, wouldn't it? This country is full, Femi, and the people of Britain do not want open borders. I do, and the people of Britain do not want open borders. They don't want open borders.
You're not an economist. The economist that the Tories use to make their decisions, the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, says that the lack of immigration is one of the things that's making our economy. People across this country are struggling to keep their homes, pay their bills. They are in poverty, and Brexit is one of the things that has made things worse. The Bank of England confirmed recently that Brexit has added 6% of the cost of food. You may not be struggling, but people across this country, they really are. And Brexit is one of the things making this worse. And the government could make things better, and they're choosing not to.
If we're crying out for workers, what about the 264,000 people on job seekers allowance? Why don't we get some of them to fill some of these vacancies? Once again, I've got to stress to you, Femi, you're absolutely wrong. The people of Britain do not want open borders. That's why they voted for Brexit, for sovereignty over our borders. Having said that, I would accept that isn't going very well.
As for the people on job seekers allowance, many of them are looking for work, and many of the jobs that need to be filled. So, for example, fruit picking. I think it was barely 1% of fruit pickers in the UK are actually British born. They don't want to do those jobs. So there are major gaps in the economy that require immigration in order to fill them. As for immigration, that was not on the ballot paper in 2016. You are making that up.
I'm not making it up. This is what people thought.
Was it about,
no. Do you really think that when people voted for Brexit, that they go, well, I'll vote to leave the EU as long as millions of people can still come into this country? Because if you think that, you're in fantasy land. You're absolutely wrong.
Brexit caused a night. Was it?
You're wrong, Femi. Look, let me ask you a final question.
I'll answer the question. Brexit caused a 91% drop in EU nursing applications after this. When nursing shortage is one of the major problems in the NHS. So, I don't think when people
just to clarify, Femi.
Let me finish my point.
No,
I don't think in 2016. I don't think in 2016 people voted to
Just to clarify, then, you think that the British people want open borders?
I think the British people want a staffed NHS, which is.
Do they want open borders, though?
It's not full open borders.
No. I'll answer it. Since you won't answer it, I'll answer it. No, they don't. A final question to you. Do you think there's any prospect of Britain rejoining, or you achieving your fantasy dream of Britain rejoining the EU?
You asked a question. The EU does not require open borders. If you want to move here to work live more than 3 months,
free movement.
You have to
People don't want free movement.
Kevin, let's have a civilized discussion. You have to have either a job or have enough money to not become a burden on the welfare state. If that's not open borders. As for do I think that it's likely that we'll rejoin the EU single market, that is a question of whether or not the government actually cares about the millions of people who are currently in poverty, because they have said explicitly that Brexit would make things better for the people across this country. They're simply choosing not to do it. People who are struggling to feed their kids, keep their homes right now, there is an answer. They're simply choosing to keep
that's what they're going. They're going, I can't afford my gas bill. Hope we rejoin the EU.